Moving on now to introduce our speaker, Shahrokh Monjazeb. He's been a faculty member of the Wilmette Institute since 2015. He's been working through the tablets to the kings and the various other tablets in Summons of Lord of Hosts. And we've already run 3 different courses by him. The first two courses, one was on the Lohe Sultan and one was on the Surah Muluk. Then there was another course covering the Lohe Rais, the Surah Rais, and the Lohe Fuad, which those 2 tablets were addressed to 2 prominent Ottoman officials, ministers. Sometimes they were the prime minister and sometimes they were the foreign minister for the Ottoman Empire. We are now turning to 2 courses in 2022. One course, the one we're talking about today, will cover 3 of the monarchs, and then in the fall we'll run another course which will cover the others, which are what? We've got the Pope Pius IX, the Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary Empire, and Kaiser Wilhelm of the German Empire. So we'll have that one in the fall. The talk today is open to the public, but the other 3 in this series are for people who are taking the course. And if you're interested in taking the course about these particular monarchs, you can go to our website, wilmetteinstitute.org, and find the registration link. The registration is still open. So without further discussion, I will turn this over to Shahrokh and welcome him. Thank you so much for joining us, Shahrokh. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stockman. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here again. This is the 4th course in the study of the Bahá'u'llah's letters to the kings. It is entitled God Summons Europe. These are we were going to be examining individual tablets revealed by Baha'u'llah to prominent monarchs of the European continent, who in the mid 19th century was really the epicenter of the political powers of the world. So today we're going to be looking at Baha'u'llah's first tablet to Napoleon III. He's the only monarch that was addressed by Baha'u'llah twice. Although all the monarchs were addressed collectively in Surah Al-Muluk, or Surah of the Kings, but most of the monarchs, with the exception of him and one of the prime ministers who was not a monarch, namely Ali Pasha, the Turkish prime minister, who was addressed also twice. But Napoleon III was actually addressed twice here. So this is the first tablet to Napoleon III. Now this tablet, as many of you may know, we have never had the full English translation of it. In fact, the original text of the tablet was not even published in its original language till about 15 years ago. So it is a relatively new tablet, if you will, as far as Baha'i studies goes. And here today I will be presenting a full translation, a provisional translation, incorporating the excerpts that Shoghi Effendi translated and included in his general letter to the Baha'is of the West entitled "The Promised Days Come." I'll talk to about that a little bit more as we get closer to that. So before anything else, I think it would be appropriate to introduce the recipient of this tablet, the addressee, if you will, Napoleon III. It's important for historical context to know who he was, what was his background, because there are references that are made by Baha'u'llah that may be subtle, particularly in his second tablet, which is much lengthier than the first one. And so knowing the events of his life and how he came to power and his genealogy, because most people are familiar with the great Napoleon Bonaparte, but oftentimes people are not sure who Napoleon III was. Most of the time, they don't even know if there was a Napoleon II, and I'll explain all that. So today I'm going to talk about his early life and early reign up to the Crimean War, and then we will examine the rest of his reign up to his basically his downfall and again his death, and how everything came to a head, basically based on Baha'u'llah's prophecies and warnings in the second seminar of this course. So this course will include 4 webinars. This is the first webinar. The second will cover Baha'u'llah's second tablet to Napoleon III. And then for the third and the fourth webinars, we will be examining the tablet to Tsar Alexander II of Russia, who were contemporaries. These were all contemporary monarchs. And finally, the tablet to Queen Victoria. So about Napoleon III, he was born Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. He was named after his father, Louis, and of course, his uncle, Napoleon, which became, again, a very popular within the family, as you can see. So he was born in Paris on April 20th, 1808. He was the youngest of the 3 sons of Louis Bonaparte, the younger brother of Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. And his mother, it's worth mentioning, was Hortense de Beauharnais, daughter of Josephine de Beauharnais. You all have heard about the Empress of France, the famous Empress of France, Josephine, who was the love of Napoleon. But she was previously married. So her daughter from the previous marriage was married to Napoleon Great's younger brother. So Napoleon's younger brother, Louis Bonaparte, was the father of Charles Louis, that the individual who Baha'u'llah addressed, and his mother was the daughter of Empress Josephine. So in a way, it made his uncle, if you will, he was his uncle, but he was also again related, through the family, because his brother had married the daughter of his, the stepdaughter of his brother, if you will. After the fall, of course, of an exile of his uncle, Charles Louis and his family were forced into exile, settling for many years in Switzerland. They couldn't be obviously in France because they had become persona non grata after the downfall of the great Napoleon and his exile to St. Helena. As his parents were already separated by then, Charles Louis lived with his mother for the most part until her death in 1837. In 1832, when the Duke of Reichstadt, also known as Napoleon II, who was Napoleon's only surviving son, he was not from Josephine. For those of you who are familiar with the biography of Napoleon, Josephine had become barren, and as a result could not produce an heir. So towards the end of his reign, the great Napoleon remarried, divorced Josephine reluctantly, and married Marie-Louise. And from that union, a son, an heir, was born, who unfortunately did not live very long. He lived to be about 21 years of age, but lived most of his life in exile. I think he was only officially an emperor once Napoleon abdicated for about a month or so. So when he passed away in 1832, who was in exile at the time in Austria, um, then Charles Louis became the de facto heir of the dynasty and the leader of the Bonapartist cause. Between 1833 to 1839, he began writing more of his political philosophies and his vision for himself and what he was to do. He was at that time, he had become very much of a socialist and wanted to pick up the cause of reforming the what his uncle had begun, but in a more of a socialist approach at the time. But deep down, he obviously felt that he was the heir to the Bonaparte dynasty, which should be restored to France once again. In one instance, he wrote, "I believe that from time to time men are created whom I call volunteers of Providence, in whose hands are placed the destiny of their countries. I believe I am one of those men. If I am wrong, I can perish uselessly. If I'm right, then Providence will put me into a position to fulfill my mission." It's very interesting because later on, in a retroactive way, if we look back at this in retrospect, we will see that some of this vision came true, but some of it also was part of his downfall as well. In the fall of 1836, he initiated a coup against the French government of King Louis Philippe from the city of Strasbourg. However, the coup was very short-lived, and Charles Louis had to flee back to Switzerland. The French king, Louis Philippe, was enraged by this brazen yet ill-conceived attempt by the Bonapartists to overthrow his government. And as such, he demanded that the Swiss government extradite Charles Louis back to France, but the Swiss refused, claiming he was a Swiss citizen, which was true, and that he was also an enlisted officer in the Swiss army. But when the French threatened the Swiss with war, Charles Louis decided to voluntarily leave Switzerland, embarking on a multi-nation tour of Britain, Brazil, and the United States. While traveling in the USA, which has a very interesting story about who he met while he was in the United States, but we don't have time for it. While he was traveling in 1837, he was informed of his mother's illness. So he hurried back to Switzerland and was at his mother's bedside when she passed away in August of 1837. After his mother's death, having inherited from her a large fortune, he moved to London in October of 1838 and began connecting with London's high society, including the future Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, and the renowned British scientist, Michael Faraday. Napoleon was very interested in science, and we will see that when later he was imprisoned, he conducted many scientific experiments. So Michael Faraday had influenced him, to become very interested in science. And then when he becomes an emperor as well, he gave precedence to a lot of scientists, and promoted the sort of the industrialization and development of the sciences in France as well. While in London, Charles Louis began planning for his second attempt to overthrow the French monarchy of King Louis Philippe. In the summer of 1840, he decided to launch his second attempt to stir a popular uprising against the French government. However, this time the attempted insurrection was literally dead on arrival. On August 6, 1840, Charles Louis and about 60 militiamen who he had hired sailed across the English Channel and landed on the port of Boulogne. Unfortunately for them, soon after their landing, through several misfortunate occurrences, the small band of insurrectionists were arrested, including Napoleon himself, by the French authorities. They were put in jail, and they were all tried in the court of law. But more than anything, it was the way it occurred. It was so embarrassing, the outcome of this, and he became this sort of second coup attempt, because he was as a Bonaparte. He still was in the eye of the public, So the press particularly lampooned him, both the British and the French press, because of this second attempt that was very pathetic, and one of the newspapers wrote, "This surpasses comedy. One doesn't kill crazy people, one just locks them up." And in fact, that's what they did. For his insurrection attempt, Charles Louis was tried and sentenced to life imprisonment. After his trial, he was transferred to the fortress prison at Ham in northern France, where he began his life sentence in October of 1840. While in prison at Ham, he began writing political essays and commentaries, even publishing a book in 1844 on the causes of poverty in the French industrial working class and how to eliminate it. These writings made him quite popular among the French intelligentsia and would help him with his political aspirations in the years to come. However, he was chomping at the bit to get out. He did not want to spend the rest of his life a prisoner. So he was quite a schemer, if you will, and so he planned his escape, and for a number of months, and through elaborate planning and a bit of luck, he managed to escape from the prison on the 25th of May, 1846. So he served 6 years of his life sentence at the Ham prison, and then from there he escaped to London and kind of reconnected himself quickly with the British high society, and once again began preparing for his future return to his homeland. For him, this was a lifelong dream, and he felt that it was his destiny to get back to France. But obviously, he had two unfortunate attempts that had landed. The last one had landed him in prison. So he needed an opportunity that really would be safe for him to get back into France. And this came in 1848. As you know, there were European revolutions all across the European continent, with the exception of UK and Russia. But all the nations, the other nations, went through a revolution. Now, this, especially in France, the government of Louis Philippe was overthrown, and a second republic was declared. So this gave Charles Louis the political opportunity he was looking for to make a bid for the leadership of this newly formed French Second Republic. Through intricate and calculating political planning, he managed to get his name in as a candidate for the presidential election of the newly established French Republic. And being blessed with the surname of Bonaparte at a time of great national patriotism towards his uncle, the great Emperor Napoleon, Charles Louis won the election for presidency in a landslide. In fact, he received 70% of the votes cast, and so he was declared the president of the Second Republic on December of 1848. Now, although he was held in low regard by most of his contemporary political rivals. He was very much unlike his uncle. He was not very charismatic. He was, someone who was very muted. He kept his card. He had a poker face. He kept his card, so to speak, very close to his chest. Did not share. He was very enigmatic. And he was really not as good a statesman as his uncle was. But again, one of the things, his virtues was he proved himself to be one of the most able politicians of the 19th century. He was great in his planning and his tactics and his various machinations to bring about what he desired to be achieved. Although Charles Louis had achieved a tremendous milestone in his political career by becoming the president of the new republic, he was not content with this, obviously. Deep down, his ultimate goal was to achieve the absolute power of an emperor like his uncle. And as he had said, that he felt that was his God-given mandate, if you will, and it's something that it was his birthright. On the day he took the presidential oath of office, he told an old friend that we are not at the summit yet. This is only a stop on the way, a terrace where we may rest a moment to gaze at the horizon. After his confirmation as the president of France, against the advice of some of his political associates, he took the title Prince President. And instead of wearing plain clothes, as other politicians did, he chose the uniform of the General-in-Chief of the National Guard. So again, he wanted to revive the old style of what his uncle had. So, he was really going against the popular grain, but he didn't care. Charles Louis knew, one of the things that he knew so painfully, if you will, at the time, that in order to remain in power, he would have to alter the new constitution, which dictated that the president's term of office was 4 years. And once his term ended, he was not eligible for re-election to a second term. This was part of the new constitution in order to not allow any way of establishing some kind of a dictatorship. They said, the presidency is going to be 4 years and that's it. So he obviously had issues with it. So what he did for the next few years, or the remaining part of his term, he campaigned vigorously to have the French Legislative Assembly revise the Constitution. His claim was also that he couldn't, all the reforms that he had in mind, he couldn't do it in the time of his presidency, and he would be restricted and circumscribed by the term of office. But unfortunately, his hopes were dashed in the summer of 1851 when the legislature unequivocally voted to reject his request for changing the Constitution or amending the Constitution to extend another term for the presidency. So, seeing no further hope to remain in power legally, Charles Louis organized a massive coup, which again he planned with many of his loyalists. And on December 2nd, 1851, he dissolved the legislature and arrested a large number of his political opponents. He did it overnight. He basically occupied Paris, had troops occupy Paris the evening before, and it was very well organized. And so by the morning, they had already arrested, a very large number of opponents. He announced to the French people that as their president, he was restoring universal suffrage, which had been revoked previously by the Legislative Assembly, and would seek their approval through a plebiscite. of fundamental changes in the constitution. So he basically made the coup, even though it was for his own end, but he told the public that he did it for them because he felt that their rights were being violated. And as the president of the people, he felt that he couldn't, hold back and just watch, the rights of the people of France be eroded by the conservatives in this legislative assembly, and hence the coup d'état. Now, the coup d'état of 1851 effectively made Charles Louis Napoleon dictator of France. So he was one step closer to what he wanted to achieve. Opposition was ruthlessly suppressed in Paris and the provinces. It is estimated that about 100,000 people were arrested, and by the end of the year, over 20,000 were either sentenced to imprisonment or exiled to the various colonies, the French colonies. So, he basically cleaned out house. On December 21st, 1851, as he had promised, a plebiscite was held asking the French people to approve the coup d'etat and to grant the president the right to draw up a new constitution. The French people overwhelmingly voted in favor of the president's actions and a new constitution. So on January 14th, soon thereafter, a new constitution modeled directly on the consulate of the first Napoleon was introduced. It declared that the chief of the state was responsible to the nation, but at the same time, it gave him free and unfettered authority to conduct the nation's affair, essentially making him an emperor. So Charles Louis had finally won. He was soon to claim his position as Emperor Napoleon III of France. And in fact, when they amended the Constitution, the word "the president" was in there, but in few months, what he did, he actually just had the name of the president changed to the emperor. That's the way, because it was already planned. And even though it had gone through the assembly, but the drafting of the Constitution was done by a small group of loyalists to him, and then was taken to the legislature, which was also heavily packed by his supporters. So this is a photo of one of his first portraits as the Emperor Napoleon III, and he took the title Napoleon III to give validation to Napoleon Great's son as being the second Napoleon. Now, his foreign policy, it's worth mentioning, and we're just going to talk about his foreign policy for the remainder of the 1850s up to about 1860, because there was a bit of a shift after that, and I'll be covering that in the next webinar. At the time of officially becoming the Emperor of France on December 2nd, 1852, which was exactly a year after his coup d'etat that sealed his dictatorship, Napoleon III knew that he still had to fulfill the promises of national glory associated with his name. There was so much, the name Napoleon was such a great pride, and he had ridden on the coattail of his uncle, if you will, and having the name and having the kind of the legacy. And by then now the body of Napoleon had been brought back from St. Helena and had been entombed in Fontainebleau, I believe, the palace. So, he was the great hero, the great Napoleon, to the French people. And but so he needed to show that he was like his uncle. So again, he began looking at ways of bringing back France to its former glory. So as the supreme ruler of France, he spent the greater part of the 1850s and early 1860s to restore France's old position of ascendancy in Europe. For achieving this ascendancy, Napoleon III knew that to regain back French ascendancy, in Europe, he would have to break the restrictions imposed on France by the treatises of 1815, which established the Concert of Europe after the final downfall of his uncle, Emperor Napoleon I. He was also aware that the chief supporter of those crippling treatises against France in the mid-19th century was Russia, and which was using them to establish its own ascendancy on the continent. Now, as one historian puts it, it was Napoleon III's good fortune that he came to power at a time when the fear of Russia overshadowed fear of France among the states of Europe. And he soon discovered that France would not lack allies in pursuing an anti-Russian policy. Since the British were the fiercest opponent to Russia and feared the Russian threat to the European balance of power more than any other nation in Europe, Napoleon began establishing an alliance with Queen Victoria and the British government against Russia. And this came to a head with the alliances that came together for the Crimean War. Now, without going into too much detail about the Crimean War, it was a war that was there to prevent Russia from controlling the Ottoman Empire, which ruled over the Balkans and Constantinople at that time. And that was the reason that this war was waged. And Russia was very powerful. Its navy was more advanced at the time than the Ottomans. And the Ottomans would have just completely collapsed if the French and the British had not come to their aid. Although a terrible war with heavy casualties on both sides, it was the alliance between France and Britain that secured victory for the Ottoman Empire over its arch nemesis, Russia. However, the true political winner in the Crimean War was France, who managed to reestablish itself as one of the great powers of Europe. So this was one of the first great achievement by Napoleon III. It brought glory to France because it brought a victory, even though it was really not like the wars of his uncle, but he needed to show them that France could now stand with the rest of the nations. So by doing this, France now became one of the great powers of Europe. Now, turning to Baha'u'llah's summon to Napoleon III, which was obviously towards the end of his reign and in the late 1860s. So I want to bring you back now to Baha'u'llah in the last year of his sojourn, in his exile in the city of Edirne. And here Baha'u'llah addressed two exclusive letters to Emperor Napoleon III. The first letter was revealed and sent to the French emperor during the last few months of Baha'u'llah's exile in the European Turkish city of Edirne, or Adrianople, if you will. This was likely after the revelation of the Lawh Sultan, the tablet, Baha'u'llah's tablet to Nasruddin Shah, which Baha'u'llah revealed in Edirne, but kept it to himself. In fact, he kind of teased some of his followers that he had revealed this special tablet to the king of Iran, to the Shah, but he would say that its messenger was not created as yet. And as we know the story that, Badi, Agha Buzurg Nayshaburi, was destined to become this great courier, this great messenger, to take this letter of Baha'u'llah. So the first letter of all the kings was revealed by Baha'u'llah addressing Nasruddin Shah. This would have been after the Surah Muluk. The Surah Muluk, as I spoke in my previous course, was revealed in 1866, which addressed all the kings and Sultan of Turkey as well, and many others. It's a very lengthy 50 pages long in translation. But the next biggest tablet to the kings and the lengthiest to a single monarch was Loh Sultan, the tablet to the Shah of Iran, which I also did a course on through the Wilmette Institute. It's on YouTube. For those of you who are interested, you can go and have a look. So that was the tablet to Nasiruddin Shah. We think that was revealed. There's no colophon, unfortunately, for many of these tablets that actually gave the date of revelation, but through historical investigation and narrowing down the facts, it was revealed in the early months of 1868. Now, the next tablet to the individual monarch, was Emperor Napoleon III's first tablet, which we're going to be looking at. So, and then there was the second letter to Napoleon III, which was revealed much lengthier, and we're going to talk about that and explore that and study that at the next webinar. And this one was revealed a few months after Baha'u'lláh was exiled to the penal colony of Akka. While Baha'u'lláh was in solitary confinement, that tablet was revealed and was sent to Napoleon. Now, another thing to mention, Baha'u'llah's first tablet to Napoleon III is rather unique in comparison to all his other individual summons and proclamations to the rulers of the world. How is it different? Unlike the other summons, its tone is rather mild and non-proclamatory. In fact, the Guardian uses the word non-provocative. All the other tablets are very direct, very proclamatory, and this God speaking. It's revealed. They're revealed in the language that God speaking. But in this tablet, which you will see, which Baha'u'lláh used to really test the sincerity of the emperor, because he had claimed that he was basically an advocate for the downtrodden, basically someone who was the champion of the dispossessed and the oppressed. And here he was tested, and we will see that. So the author of this tablet, as you will see, comes across as a meek and oppressed holy man, and not as the supreme manifestation of God summoning God's vassals, as Baha'u'lláh refers to the kings, and apprising them of his divine mission. So you will see that and yet it's very interesting, because this period, during the Adrianople period, this was the period of Baha'u'llah's public proclamation, which had begun. I mean, you look at the tone, for example, of Surah Muluk, revealed 2 years earlier. It is absolutely awe-inspiring, and it's very powerful and challenging. Here, this tablet, he's trying to test to see, how Napoleon is going to respond. In his analysis of Baha'u'llah's proclamation to the French Emperor, Shoghi Effendi in The Promised Day Is Come, in fact, writes, in his first tablet to Napoleon III, Baha'u'llah, wishing to test the sincerity of the emperor's motives and deliberately assuming a meek and unprovocative tone, had, after expatiating on the sufferings he had endured, addressed him in the following words. And then the Guardian quotes an excerpt from this first tablet, which we're going to be placing into the tablet. And that's paragraph 123 of The Promised Day Is Come. In paragraph 10, about the date of revelation of the tablet, again, we don't have a colophon, so we don't know the exact date, but I think we can narrow it down to about 2 months, if you will. In paragraph 10 of the tablet, Baha'u'lláh states that it has been 25 years since the persecution against him and his co-religionists, meaning the Babis, had begun, putting the revelation of the tablets sometime in the early months of the Muslim year 1285. So the year of the Babs declaration is 1260. You add 25 years to that, you get 1285. Now, the year 1285 began on April 24th, 1868. So the tablet could not have been revealed any sooner than late April. So that's what we know. And we know that it was also revealed in Adrianople, and Baha'u'lláh was exiled in August so again, from late April to early August, that would be the window. Now, let's see if we can narrow it down. I believe since the tablet makes no mention of the farman of the Sultan, or the Sultan's edict of Baha'u'llah's exile to Akka, which was issued on July 26, 1868, the revelation of the tablet was sometime then between late April to late July of 1868. But again, we don't know. But it's good. We do have a much narrower window. With some of the other tablets, we don't. And Baha'u'lláh has testified in himself, or has stated in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, that he did send the first tablet from Adrianople, and then he received a response of sorts when he was in Akka. So, and we'll explore that in the next session. A little bit more about the external features of the tablet, as we shall observe shortly. Baha'u'llah's first tablet to Napoleon III is not very long. In fact, it is revealed in both Arabic and Persian, very similar to Loh Sultan, the tablet to Nasir-ad-Din Shah, which began in Arabic, and then the middle part of it is in Persian, and then the ending part is also in Arabic. So this tablet's almost half and half, as you will see. The first half of it, or the exordium, as I like to call it, of the tablet, which is essentially a prayer. It's very fascinating, but it is a prayer. So he begins this tablet with a long prayer, very touching, very moving prayer. It is revealed in Arabic, and the second half, where Baha'u'lláh actually addresses the emperor, is composed in Persian. As I said, its style is very similar to that of Loh Sultan, which was revealed a few months earlier, but was dispatched a year later from Akka. Now, let's look at the tablet itself. Baha'u'lláh begins Loh Napoleon. This is actually how Shoghi Effendi transliterated this in the list of Baha'u'llah's tablets. Loh Napoleon. So the tablet begins in Arabic with these words, and I'll share with you the first couple of lines. هو الله تعالى شانه الفضل والعدل وإنه لهو المستعان وعليها تكلان. سبحانك اللهم يا إلهي أنت تعلم بأني ما أردت في ذكر إلا ذكرك وفي توجهي إلى جهة إلا جهة فضلك ومواهبك وما أردت إلا ما أردته لعبادك. The English translation of this excerpt that I just read, which is the opening sentence, the first couple sentence, begins, He is God, with the invocation, He is God, exalted is He in His grace and justice. He verily is the one whose help is sought by all men and who is the object of their true reliance. Then begins the prayer. Glorified art thou, O Lord my God. Thou knowest well that my sole aim in raising my voice hath been to make mention of thee and to extol thy virtues, fixing my gaze only in the direction of thy grace and favor, and wishing for naught else but what thou hast wished for thy servants and thy people. I have moreover sought only to carry out the mission thou didst enjoin upon me as the voice that proclaimeth thy virtues and thy praise, and have desired only what thou hast desired through thy decree. I have breathed no word unto thy people, save that which thou hast commanded me to utter, and no epistle have I sent to anyone except for the sole purpose of protection of thy creatures and preservation of thy servants. Otherwise, I swear by thyself, the most exalted, the most high, I have no intention in self-preservation, nor do I seek any protection for myself in thy realm. I have offered up my whole being in thy path, seeking only the glorification of thy word. Thou art well aware, O my God, what hath befallen these thy servants, and yet despite this, I have sought only to reveal thy revelation among thy servants and promote thy sovereign might amidst thy creatures. O Lord, thou knowest full well that thy loved ones have been cut off from every path and have been encompassed by manifold adversities from every direction. Indeed, they have suffered such woes, the like of which no one hath experienced in the past. How many the heads which were borne on spears in thy path? How numerous the breasts which were lacerated by arrows for the sake of thy love? How many times were the blood of thy loved ones spilled upon thy earth? How often has a sister lamented and mourned her separation from her brother? How numerous the fathers who wailed in grief over the murder of their sons? How many the suckling babes who were cruelly detached from their mother's breasts? All this hath befallen these wronged ones after they, one and all, have acknowledged thy unity and testified to thy oneness. I beseech thee, O my Lord, by thy most excellent titles and by thy most perfect and exalted word, to help these wronged ones enter the stronghold of thy protection, so that no one could deal with them unjustly any longer or seize them with tyranny. Thou art verily the Almighty, the All-Glorious, whose help is implored by all men. Here ends the first section, or the exordium of the tablet, which is composed in Arabic, as I mentioned earlier. The remaining paragraphs of the tablet are revealed in Persian, and this is where Baha'u'lláh now begins to address the emperor directly. What this servant humbly presents before thee is that it hath now been 25 years since a group of God's servants have had no restful night, nor found a moment of peace and security. They have been beset at all times by the onslaught of hatred and have been tormented by manifold expressions of violence and anger. How many the children who have become fatherless, and similarly, how many fathers who have lost their children? How numerous the mothers who have shed tears of anguish in their separation from their offspring, and how many the children who have cried and lamented over the loss of their mothers. Numerous are the young babes who have drunk the cup of martyrdom. No mercy has been shown to these people, man and woman alike. How frequent were the nights when the beasts of the fields and birds of the skies peacefully rested in their nests, whereas these servants of God, in fear and consternation, found no abode of safety and security. Numerous are the men from among these people who at eventide were possessed of utmost wealth and affluence, but when the morning came, found themselves in utter abasement and destitution, as their property had been plundered and their earthly possessions ransacked. No land remaineth that hath not been stained by the blood of these wronged ones, and no locality could be found which hath not become the place of martyrdom for countless numbers of these hapless people. How many women who, after being made captive, were dragged from place to place and from city to city, and likewise how many men who were sold for a sum of money. Numerous are also those who out of fear ran off into the wilderness, and none knoweth whither have they gone, and still others today remain incarcerated. Lamentations of these victims of tyranny reverberate by day and by night, and the cries of these captives can be heard at all times. All this hath occurred without any wrongdoing on the part of these people. The following paragraph 13, and more than half of paragraph 14 of this tablet, has been rendered into English by Shoghi Effendi and quoted by him in paragraph 123 of The Promised Day is Come. So here begins Shoghi Effendi's translation. Two statements graciously uttered by the king of the age have reached the ears of these wronged ones. These pronouncements are in truth the king of all pronouncements, the like of which have never been heard from any sovereign. The first was the answer given the Russian government when it inquired why the war, the Crimean War, was waged against it. Thou didst reply, the cry of the oppressed who without guilt or blame were drowned in the Black Sea wakened me at dawn. Wherefore I took up arms against thee. So Baha'u'lláh is quoting what was published in the newspapers about what Napoleon had claimed, that he was going to war to protect the innocent. So here, God is challenging him. These oppressed ones, however, have suffered a greater wrong and are in greater distress, whereas the trials inflicted upon those people lasted but one day. The troubles borne by these servants have continued for 25 years, every moment of which has held for us a grievous affliction. Now, the reference to the trials, what happened in the Crimean War was that Russia sank a couple of ships, the Ottoman fleet, from the Ottoman fleet at the beginning, which kind of triggered the war. And people obviously were killed when those ships were sunk, but these were sailors and they were in war. But Napoleon had claimed that the Turks were innocent and he was coming to their aid against the big bear, the big Russia, who everyone had come to despise in Europe at the time. So he was using that as a political chip, if you will, and a pretext to come enter the war in alliance with Britain, and with Britain, obviously, by himself, France it would have been very hard. But now with the Great Britain and their fleet and everything, I mean, Russia stood no chance. So here, but yet politically, he was trying to say, "Oh, I just came in to protect the innocent." So Baha'u'lláh challenges it. He says those people, they're suffering. Yes, they were innocent and they suffered and they were killed, but it was only one day. Whereas the trials inflicted upon these people has continued for 25 years. So Baha'u'lláh makes a comparison and says that if you went to the aid of those people, I mean, naturally you got to come to our aid. So again, it's a very, very clever way that God is kind of examining the sincerity of the words of Napoleon III. Now, Baha'u'lláh continues, the other weighty statement, which was indeed a wondrous statement manifested to the world, was this. And again, Baha'u'lláh is quoting the emperors. Ours is the responsibility to avenge the oppressed and succor the helpless. I mean, that it's done now. I mean, it's like Napoleon has got himself into you're the champion of the oppressed and the succor of the helpless. Here we are. There's no better, group for you to rescue and to support. And then, Baha'u'lláh continues, the fame of the emperor's justice and fairness has brought hope to a great many souls. It beseemeth the king of the age to inquire into the condition of such as have been wronged, and it behooveth him to extend his care to the weak. Verily, there hath not been, nor is there now on earth anyone as oppressed as we are, or as helpless as these wanderers. Beautiful, beautifully translated, beautifully expressed. Here, this is the challenge that Baha'u'lláh has very gently, very lovingly, very kindly is putting to this great emperor at the height of his power. So this ends Shoghi Effendi's translation. The tablet continues. Baha'u'lláh says, for all beings, whether human or animal, wild beasts or birds, all abide safely and securely within their sanctuary, except these feeble souls who are at every hour bound by the shackles of enmity and are ruthlessly tied down by the heavy chains of hatred and violence. We can no longer tolerate such cruelty, and our hearts are no longer filled with patience and resignation. It's very interesting. This last statement, our hearts, we can no longer, tolerate. I mean, basically, as they say in Persian, the knife has hit the bone, if you will. It's just 25 years we've been as patient as we could be, but now we need someone to help us. So this is what Baha'u'lláh, and then he ends the tablet perhaps with the most poignant supplication. Here, the manifestation of God is supplicating to God's vassal. We supplicate thy majesty to gaze upon these servants with his mercy, so that we may all take refuge beneath the shelter of his sovereign protection. And with that, he ends the tablet. So I think our time has just about expired. I have more things to say, but I will say it, in the next, the way the tablet was received, how Baha'u'lláh got this tablet to Napoleon. He did receive it, and the Guardian has also made mention of the response of the emperor, but it obviously evoked this this next tablet, which is absolutely awe-inspiring and very much lengthier. It's probably one of the lengthiest tablet to a single monarch, next to the tablet to Nasruddin Shah. So at this point, I'll take some questions from those who are present and the students of the course. Dr. Stockman, if you can come. I think I have to end my screen sharing here, and then I think I am. Are we here?
Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah, you should be able to.
I can hear you.
Yeah, we've got a few questions, and it's some people want to know whether the original tablet sent to the Napoleon has been found, whether it's in the archives in France. Do we know anything about how it got translated into French or anything of that kind?
Yes, it was. I'll tell you this. I'll tell you a bit more. What Baha'u'lláh did, he actually confidentially contacted a very prominent French politician who was also the author of a recently published book on the Babis, namely Comte de Gobineau. Gobineau had served as the ambassador to Iran for 1 year, and at the time of the revelation in 1868 of this tablet, he was the ambassador to Greece. So Greece was very close. And remember, the Ottomans had a great relationship with the French. Now, there's been always questions about why Gobineau, okay? And again, we don't know for sure. But Baha'u'lláh does say that he contacted his minister. He does not mention, the name of the minister, but there is evidence, there's historical evidence that pretty much proves that it was Comte de Gobineau. Because Gobineau himself, in a correspondence with the Austrian ambassador, says that he received a confidential letter from Baha'u'lláh. Okay, and so that really kind of puts it in that. Now, there would have been other channels why Baha'u'lláh did not use, for example, the French, council. Or the French ambassador as well, at the Sublime Porte. Remember, Baha'u'lláh was obviously, there's several reasons, but there's 3 good reasons that I will give you here. Is that obviously Baha'u'lláh is in exile, and he wanted this to actually get to the emperor, no matter what, that would not get bogged down or filtered out by the politicians, and not get to the emperor. So, and if you recall, Baha'u'lláh had already castigated the last French ambassador to the Sublime Porte, to the Ottoman, to Istanbul, Marquis de Moustiers. Now, at this time, Marquis de Moustiers had been elevated by Napoleon III to the foreign minister of France. So obviously, and he had colluded with Mirza Hossein Khan Moshir-ud-Dowleh, the Safir or the minister of Iran at the Sublime Porte. So obviously he would not be friendly to Baha'u'lláh. Okay, so that's one reason. The other reason is Gobineau had published just 3 years earlier one of the most popular books, Religion and Philosophy in Central Asia, right? Which, although it's very racist, it dedicates more than half the books to the Babi cause. And although the source is from a hostile source, but it was the first book that actually brought the Babi faith to the West, if you will. And it was actually this book that the young E.G. Brown in Cambridge University, or I think where he was, he saw it in one of the libraries, and when he read it, he was inspired by it. So obviously, Gobineau was sympathetic to the Babis because he had dedicated more than half of his book to the the cause of the Bab and the religion of the Bab. Even though, again, Elam Nicola criticized them for accuracy, it was not a very accurate description, but it was a description. So again, so obviously Baha'u'llah felt that there was some empathy, with Gobineau. The other thing is Gobineau was very popular amongst the French. So he knew that if he asked him to take that to the emperor, he probably had the ear of the emperor, because the emperor probably was very proud of him for publishing. He was an individual who was very much a pro emperor, So, and he actually, the way it sounds, that he took it personally to him, and then, he wrote back to Baha'u'llah saying that I have submitted your letter, but I haven't received the response, from, for it. But, so I'll talk about that. I'll bring what Baha'u'llah says in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf next time. So definitely, in my opinion, well, I shouldn't say definitely, because we don't have conclusive evidence, but, all signs point to the fact that it was Count de Gobineau that assisted with the transmission of this first tablet to Emperor Napoleon III. Yes, but we do not have. I believe Mujan Momin had done the investigation when he wrote his great book, The Western Accounts, which covers the first 100 years of the Baha'i religions, and they have in French Foreign Office, or even in the papers of Gobineau, there hasn't been, so far, anything has not been discovered that as far as that. But again, we don't know. I mean, it may have been destroyed. I mean, Napoleon may have just grabbed it and basically tore it and said, this is garbage. Now, I'll talk about why the response of the emperor may have been such as well, because it had political motives as well. But I'll save that for next time. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a few others. One person asks where they can obtain the original, the text of the original tablet, the original language text.
For those who read Farsi and Arabic, it was published very, very interesting and rather strange. Well, not strange in the sense that, and many people in the Baha'i world didn't know, it was discovered. Certainly wasn't announced by the House of Justice, because I remember, or the research department when it was published. I recall in the 90s and in the in early 2000s as well, I wrote to the World Center asking for a copy because of my research, and they wrote back saying that there is a copy, but it's going to be published in future. Apparently others had asked, so they didn't want to just release it to one or two individuals. So where it was published was actually very interesting. Some of you know that we all know Adib Taherzadeh wrote 4 volumes, The Revelation of Baha'u'llah. The late Dr. Bahir Forghani was a great Persian scholar and an erudite Baha'i who's now passed away, from Australia, I believe. He translated all 4 volumes of Adib Taherzadeh from English to Persian. And many of those tablets that he had referred to, that Adib Taherzadeh had referred to, the World Center provided him with the actual copies of those tablets in the original. Right. So this was it is published in the 2nd volume of the translation of Adib Taherzadeh's Revelation of Baha'u'llah. That's where I got it from, and that's where we have it. There's no other place that it has been
interesting
posted. Yeah.
Yeah. So they haven't actually prepared it to publish it in a book of its own, or a book of translations, or anything, adding it to Summons of the Lord of Hosts or anything like that.
And you know, now you can see why Baha'u'llah, when he when he went to when he was exiled to Akka, and then after the revelation of all the letters, he actually ordered that they would be placed or enshrined, if you will, into a temple, basically like a five-pointed star, if you will, like a temple of man. And this tablet is not included in there. The second tablet to Napoleon III, which oftentimes people mistake as the first tablet, but it's not. That's the second tablet. And there's a good reason. As you can see, it does not have the same tone, the proclamatory tone. All the other tablets, the tone is very similar. This is a very unique tablet in its own, that it has a very subdued and more of a subtle, I mean, it's a very meek and, as the Guardian puts it, unprovocative, tone. And so it may eventually be included in the summons of the Lord of Hosts. I would think that at least its translation, but there's no other translation of this or complete translation than the one that I have provided here right now.
Let's see, there was another question that was interesting. Where did it go? One person asked about whether there had been any tablet to the Chinese emperor. So you might want to mention who received actual tablets and who are addressed in the Kitab al-Aqdas. And perhaps a little bit about why. I assume a lot of it has to do with access to embassies and such. It's not a matter of putting a stamp on a letter to the Chinese emperor.
Let me tell you the reason is no, the Chinese emperor was not significant. You have to understand, in the middle of the 19th century, the world was governed by Europe. Okay, essentially, it was the age of colonization. China was a colony, was partly British colony. Africa were all colonized. Yep. Most of Asia was colonized. India was colonized by the Brit. So as I say, the geopolitical center of the world powers was in Europe, and the nations that wielded that, Bahá'u'lláh addressed all of them. Okay. Right. And he also addressed in Surah Muluk all the kings as well, generally, kings of the earth. So he would have addressed them, but he chose to address those who wielded the most power individually. And I think that made perfect sense, because all the others, I mean, people ask about, whether he addressed a letter to the Queen of Spain. I mean, Spain was not a significant political player at the time. So if you look at the history of the 19th century, those were. Now, the Kitab al-Aqdas was really the excerpts in the Kitab al-Aqdas were really follow-up, were part of. In my other courses, I've talked about that this proclamatory phase of Baha'u'lláh and his summons really took about 7 years, from 1866 to 1873, which culminated with the revelation in the Kitab al-Aqdas. So there is reference, and we will be addressing that in the second course in the fall. Okay, so I will be covering that. So we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Right now, the first 3 prominent rulers of Europe were Queen Victoria, Napoleon III, and Tsar Nikolaevich Alexander II. So, and he starts with them, essentially.
Well, it also makes sense because, for example, Kaiser Wilhelm is addressed in the Aqdas, but this is before the birth of the modern German Republic.
Exactly.
Germany was in the late 1860s was still not anything.
Yes, there was no German Empire. It was the largest German principality or kingdom was Prussia, and was becoming very powerful. It became actually a thorn on the side of the French, and became relevant in around 1866, around that time. And that was around the time that the Chancellor Otto von Bismarck came to power, and so on and so forth. So, and then they wanted to become a unified Germany, and then Britain and France had issues with that, and so on. So there was this kind of political tug of war during that time. But at this time, we are looking at just the top three, if you will.
Right. Exactly. And
Austria-Hungary
also at that time was very weak.
Franz Joseph and Austria-Hungary they were defeated by, in fact, there was a couple of campaigns, by like the Battle of Solferino, that the Napoleon III won. And so the Austria-Hungary was actually shrinking, and it didn't wield the same kind of power it did maybe 20, 30, 40 years earlier. And I'll address that, that there's this evolutionary process where the powers came in. And I think this is why it's so important to look at the history of Europe during that time. And then you will see and appreciate that Baha'u'lláh focused or zeroed in on those monarchs that were true powerful rulers that wielded the most power, but yet he addressed all of them, he did not, but he focused his attention on those who could make a difference. Like, for example, Queen Victoria, Tsar, and Napoleon, if all three of them had got together, essentially, they could have pretty much changed the course of history of the world, because of the expansions that they had. They pretty much covered everything, at that time, as far as lands and powers, yes.
And there were other European, Belgium had a king.
That's right.
The Netherlands had monarchy.
They're very
Denmark
small,
and Sweden did too. So there were other choices.
That's
right.
You're
right. He was writing the powerful ones, and what he was saying was meant to be representative of his message to monarchs in general.
Exactly. There were lots of kings. Let's put it that way. There were a lot of kings that were sort of throughout. There were lots of German, and and then you had kings of Hungary, and you had the places that were vassals. Some of these kings were actually vassals to other great nations, but the most powerful were really Britain, France at this time, and then and Russia, and then Germany. The unified Germany actually came to play after 1870, because they became unified at the expense of Napoleon III's fall.
Right. And long after that, also, of course, you have a king in Italy, but you don't have a king of Italy at this time. He's writing Pope Pius IX.
At this time, most of this was around the time, I think this is the period of Risorgimento in Italy, where you had there was the Italian unification. So you now have the Pope was losing. Essentially, all of Italy was under Pope, particularly the Pope that Baha'u'lláh addressed, Pope Pius IX. But eventually, his kingdom just shrunk to really what it is today, the Vatican, like the part of the city of Rome, not even the entire city of Rome. So this is something that is occurring. It's very dynamic while everything is happening. So again, Pope was the leader of the Catholic Church, but was also the king or the ruler of papal states, and but that really is it was in jeopardy. So again, again, we keep coming back to the three major ones, the major monarchs being the three that we're addressing in this course. Yes.
Sure. And the Pope, of course. The Pope, of course, is being addressed because he's in charge of the largest block of Christendom. So he's also has.
Napoleon did some really interesting things. We don't have time to really get into it, but for example, he assisted the Italian reunification efforts to appease the Catholics, because he was a Catholic himself, even by name, he actually didn't really believe in God. In some ways, he just didn't, and he was a philanderer, and we'll get to that a little bit as well. And he was only interested in his own, longevity and his own success. But anyways, so then he sent his army, because when the Italian reunification almost choked the papal state to sort of almost out of existence, but in order to keep them at least a little bit of it, then he sent an army to protect the papal
protect the Vatican.
Say that, enough is enough. You've got most of Italy. Let's just leave this little part to the
1 square mile.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that's what. But he played both sides. He was a very scheming politician, and all he was interested in is his own self-aggrandizement. I mean, that's really what his ultimate goal was. So.
A couple of other interesting questions here. One person, again, is asking about the Comte de Gobineau, whether he was the author of the essay on the inequality of human races. And of course, the answer is yes, he was. Yes. He's a notorious racist by 21st century standards.
He's considered the father of racism.
Yep.
It's actually, I think Moujan in his book really puts it. It says it seems a bit awkward that the first book that actually announced the Baha'i religion to the West was written by one of the most racist people on earth, and yet the Baha'i religions are so anti-racial, and in their teachings. So yes, I mean the works of Gobineau were actually brought to the United States and were translated and by some of the racist advocates in the 19th century. I mean, if you explore that, if you look at actually biography of Gobineau, you will see that he was definitely, and he looked at it. I mean, he looked at it in a very interesting way. He was not hostile, but he was racist. He said, that's just the way it is. He basically that's the way he put it.
And this is before the rise of modern anthropology, before the rise of modern sociology, before the encounter between Europe and the rest of the world had gotten to the point where Europeans were being were forced to realize that there was brilliance in the other religions and great depth in other cultures, and that really is the late 19th and early 20th centuries when that understanding begins to sink in more and more. They're still early part of the 19th century. They're still sort of saying, "Hey, we got the gunboats. We're taking over." There was definitely that sense. Throughout most of the 19th century, really.
Yes. So remember when he published his famous book. It was 1865, and that was a year after the U.S. Civil War, right? I believe, or just about, so again,
just at the end.
And I think Lincoln's assassination was in 1865 as well. So this book came at around that time, and it's
and just a few years after Origin of the Species by Darwin too. Which brings the idea of evolution into existence.
Exactly.
Spreads it around.
But lots were happening around this time, where Baha'u'lláh is actually addressing the world, and
Another interesting question. Someone asks about the very last tablet of the last sentence of the tablet that you translated. Do you think that Napoleon III, Baha'u'lláh was asking Napoleon III to give him exile, to accept them into France? There is that kind of almost tone there.
Yes, of course. In some ways, yes. To basically asylum. You mean? I mean, basically ask for an asylum. I mean, yes. In some ways, Baha'u'lláh had already received asylum from Sultan Abdul Majid. Not Sultan Abdul Aziz, but this is where the Iranians were trying to get the Baha'u'lláh and his small band of followers to basically come and take them, and then take them to Iran and basically destroy them, because after the exile. So, throughout the late 1850s and early 1860 till about 1861, the Sultan kept resisting. Abdul Majid kept resisting. His brother, by the time he came to power, it took a number of years, but by that time, the Ottomans basically had given Baha'u'lláh and his followers Ottoman citizenship, and then they invited them to Constantinople, and then to later on exile them to Adrianople and all. So at that time, so they were under the protection of the Ottomans, but the Ottomans mistreated them. So here, in some ways, Baha'u'lláh is asking, it's kind of leaving it open-ended to the emperor. The way he's not telling him what to do. He's telling him what to do, but he doesn't tell him specifically what to do.
Right.
He says we're oppressed. You're the champion of the oppressed. Do something about it. Bring us under your protection, which he could have done very easily, because he had, and I mean, the Ottomans would have been very happy to get rid of the Baha'is and the Azalis, because it was causing so much headache for them, that particularly the infighting that was happening in Adrianople. And that's why they decided to banish Baha'u'lláh because of that, to Akka and Mirza Yahya to Cyprus. So it's, but this is around the time that, that the Emperor Napoleon III could have done something. But as I will tell you next time, he also would have infuriated some other people if he would have done that. So anyways,
I think it's worth pointing out that Baha'u'lláh was offered asylum by the Russians and turned them down. Also,
yes, that was an early under a different emperor. It was Nicholas I. It was, we're talking about 1852, 53. It was during, the start of the Crimean War. So it was prior to that. It was in the midst of the Crimean War that Emperor Nicholas I died, and his son, Alexander II, came to power. And then he had to deal with the war and so on and so forth. But yes, I mean, Russia was so, I mean, it was a land that was really foreign to Baha'u'lláh and, to even his culture, whereas Iraq and that kind of part of the Fertile Crescent was still part of the the lands that was familiar, the culturally, was still the Middle East, and
linguistically.
So Russia, I mean, it was a good gesture. Baha'u'lláh acknowledges that. We will see that Baha'u'lláh actually does acknowledge the fact that he was given solicitude and the invitation, and he says that for that reason God has has designated a special reward for the emperor, but for the czar. But anyways, we'll get to that when we study the tablet to the czar.
Right.
But
I brought that up because I somehow don't think that Baha'u'lláh was seeking to move to a Paris suburb like Khomeini, for example, a century later. Presumably whatever help Napoleon III would have offered would not have been the opportunity
I think
to settle.
Baha'u'lláh just wanted the persecutions to stop.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just relentless persecution for so long, so many years, and it was just not stopping. And he was obviously both as the leader of a community that is very beleaguered, and also as the representative of God on earth. He felt that the cause of these innocent people that are, and he very graphically describes what was happening, to families, people being sold like slaves. I mean, men, and then women also. It's very similar way. If you read the tablet closely, it's all about the sufferings of the people, both in the prayer and in the text. It's almost, he repeats it again in when he's addressing the emperor, and it basically tells him that, you know, we are, this is the evidence. I'm telling you, we are the most oppressed. There's no other oppressed group of people on this earth. And since you are the champion of the oppressed, come and rescue us, you know. So that was really the challenge to him indirectly, but obviously fell on deaf ears. Yeah. So
one more, actually, there may be two more, but there's at least one more, and that's a very interesting question from Gary. Fascinating presentation. Could you please comment on Baha'u'llah's ability as an exile to comprehend contemporaneously the position and import of Europe and these individual monarchs in the world of his day?
Well, again, there's two elements. There is a spiritual element, and then there is the physical element of the world. I mean, obviously, newspapers were available at that time, and the news of the nations were being, you know, I know someone who kept really abreast of it was Abdul Baha. You know, he read the newspapers of the day and so on. And but obviously the manifestation of God is omniscient. He is aware of what's going on in the world. I mean, he talks about an arms race that was taking place, you know, between particularly Germany and France, with his modern, like this is around the time when machine gun was invented. It was originally invented in France, or the breech loaded, you know, howitzer guns and all that were being used, you know, that was modern warfare, you know, and navies were starting to become, later in the next decade or so, they were not made out of woods anymore. The ships were actually, you know, were made out of steel, you know, and so things were really, really changing, and God was alarmed by that, and he warned them. He said that you must stop this. And in fact, it was this arms race that later on led to the First World War. Most historians of the second half of the 19th century, all the academics now, without a shadow of a doubt, all agree that it was the arms race and the political intrigue between the nations in Europe that kind of set the stage for the First World War. You know, and you know, Abdul Baha, when he came to Europe, he said something to the effect that the Europe is like a tinderbox. That you know, it can be set ablaze at any moment, and it was. I mean, a simple assassination in Sarajevo set the war on, you know the course of the war
on fire.
Yeah.
So he said that 6 times in North America in 1912.
Yeah.
6 times.
6 times. Okay.
6 times.
Yeah. So definitely, yes, Baha'u'llah was really quite aware, because remember, the Ottomans were considered by the Europe as the sick man of Europe at this time. I mean, that's how they referred to him, the Ottoman, or the Turkish question that was always in the minds of. So they were trying to somehow create, and they had Russia breathing down the neck of the Ottomans. And so the Europes were trying to kind of, be the arbiters, if you will, like the Western Europe, nations. And later on, we have Germany, but Germany came to power after the 1870s, really. But up to that, and France kind of went out. It went from a first nation, or the first power, to a fourth-rate power, as the Guardian actually says. It was the fourth-rate power, because it became chaotic after the fall of the Second Empire. France went into a long period of, chaos, and it didn't really emerge as a power until the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, on a kind of a global scale.
Didn't recover.
He did not recover.
Not
Yes,
recover.
that's exactly
All
from
right.
that. So
It's interesting.
yeah, okay.
Well, I think we're pretty much done because those were the questions that we've got, and
Okay.
that's very good. Thank you for this fascinating presentation today about this first tablet, the tablet most of us have never seen before, and it's very good to have a provisional translation available. I'm sure the students in our course will very much enjoy further discussions about this tablet in the next 2 weeks because we have 2 weeks to comment about it. And then 2 weeks from now, of course, the next 3 presentations are not available to the public. At least they won't be for maybe a year or so. We will eventually make them available. In fact, we're going to make, on Shahrokh's request just today, we'll make the tablets to the Lohi Rais, the Surah Rais, and Lohi Fawad available. And I don't remember whether the Lohi Sultan and the Surah Muluk are available.
Yes, they are. The Surah Muluk, all 4 parts, and Lohi Sultan, all 4 parts have been for years.
So we'll make
people are it would be nice to get the rest of the last course, which is on the Turkish prime ministers.
Yep.
And also, so maybe you can tell the audiences who are not registered for the course that they can still register for the course if they're interested.
I can put in the chat the address of the, how do I get to the, I just turned off the chat. Sorry, I won't turning it on. If people go to http://wilmetteinstitute.org. I don't have it spelled right, so I don't want to make that available to people just yet. Institute. Still don't quite have it spelled right. I'm using the wrong keyboard. There we go. So they go to wilmetteinstitute.org. They will find on the menu across the top extension courses or community learning courses. There's two course tabs, and one of them will take them to the list of current courses. And there they will find the course God Summons Europe right there available, and you can click on it to read about it, and you can register for it. And the cost of the course is $95, but if people can't afford that, there are various discounts, and they can also write us and request a scholarship. So we will make it available to people for a lower rate than that, but we do need to cover our costs as much as possible. So that's a way to register for the course. We already have, well, it's not a huge number of people, but we've got plenty of room for more. And we look forward to further discussion over the next couple of weeks about this tablet, and then on to the second tablet, and then the tablet to Tsar Alexander II, and on to the tablet to Queen Victoria. So it should be quite good. Someone has just put the exact link to God Summons Europe now in the chat. So before we close this, be sure to click on it if you want to look at it. So I think that's pretty much all the questions we have. Several people have thanked you very much. They said this is a fascinating presentation. As always, Shahrokh, you do a very good job and always keep us quite interested in these topics. And we look forward to hearing from you further in the future.